Okay. Well, welcome all to the Standards Committee this evening. And a beautiful evening it is at the moment. I'd like to welcome you all. Do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Chair, but Councillor Terry Keenan is attempting to join the meeting.
Right. Okay. Oh dear. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
None.
And can we confirm the minutes of the previous meeting? Is everybody happy? Any concerns? Jackie, yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy with them, yeah.
And seconded by Charles. All okay with that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Update on the LGA's model of code of contact, sorry. And we've got pages 9 to 30. So I'm going to hand over to Anthea. We have discussed this quite a lot over the last 12 months, 2 years. It seems like a long time now. And I know that there were a few issues to be amended and a few comments that Anthea would like to discuss with us here tonight. So I'll move on to Anthea for discussion there.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, members, apologies for the delay in getting the papers sent out, but I hope the contents are fairly straightforward, and actually discussion is probably useful in any event. So members will probably recall casting their minds back to January 2019 when the Committee for Standards on Public Life issued a report on ethical standards in local government. One of the recommendations that came out of that was that there should be a model code of conduct to be adopted by local authorities. And the reason for that was that they thought every authority should use the same code of conduct, so that there was consistency across the country in terms of ethical standards. Fast forward almost 2 years, and following a lengthy consultation period run by the Local Government Association, and which this committee fed back to in July last year, the Local Government Association released its final model code of conduct at the very end of December 2020. That's in your pack as the appendix to the report. Forgive me, members, I've only got one screen tonight. Normally I have 3, so I'm struggling to bounce between the two. So the model code of conduct is in your pack. Members will recall at the last meeting there was much discussion around the code, and there were 3 areas that members asked officers to go away and consider further, and then come back to this committee and report on. Those 3 areas were in relation to the financial limit in respect of gifts and hospitality, the application of the code on members' private life, and also the wording or the potential for confusion caused by the wording around member interests. So the report in front of you, members, deals with each of those in turn. I think the most straightforward of those is the financial limit for gifts and hospitality. And what I heard at the meeting last time was that although the model code of conduct recommends a £50 limit for recording gifts and hospitality, members wanted to retain the £25 limit that we currently have, which is in our current code of conduct. And so the recommendation before you is quite simply that in section 10 of the model code of conduct, we delete reference to £50 and we replace it with reference to £25. Chair, I can see Councillor Seymour has a hand up, and I don't know if you want me to take questions throughout or if you want me to wait till the end. I'm happy with either, if that is.
Yes, sorry, Answer. I should have mentioned that before you took over. I'll leave it to you whether you want to take questions as they come up or not.
Yes, I'm happy to.
Well, just a clarification, really, because in the report at 4.4, in the paragraph at 4.4 with this limit, what you've actually got is the code should be amended to delete to £25 and replace with 50 throughout. Now, what we want is the opposite.
You're absolutely right, Councillor Seymour. And the only explanation I have for that is that I wrote this report quite late at night, and it's nothing more than an error. But the intention is the other way round: delete reference to £50 and replace it with £25.
Yes.
But yes, you're absolutely right, and I'm sorry I didn't pick up on that before it was shared with members.
Yeah.
It's a very simple mistake for me to make, but it wasn't my intention. So yes, that's entirely my fault. So moving on, the next item addressed in the report relates to the application of the code in respect of private matters. There was some discussion about this at the last meeting, and I'm not sure there was unanimity amongst the committee around how best to tackle this. But what I was asked to do is just have a look and consider whether or not we could alter the wording to bring clarity as to when the code might apply in a member's private life. And in the report, in the table, I've suggested two additions to the code of conduct. The first one is in respect of page 3 at the bottom of it, after the last paragraph. I've suggested that we add wording which reads, "This code will not apply in relation to your private life unless you make reference somehow to your position as a councillor. For example, if you use social media and have a private social media account but reference your work as councillor, show pictures of you acting in your role as councillor, or otherwise make it clear that you are a councillor, then this code will apply to your social media activity." That was the first suggested addition to the code. Councillor England, I can see you've got your hand up.
It's that word somehow. It's ambiguous. Does it need to be there?
Well, I think it's the reason I've included it, Councillor England, is because I think it would be really difficult to give an exhaustive list of when members might, when something members do might give the impression that they are a councillor or refer to the fact that they are a councillor. And it's not just relating to social media, that's simply an example. So if you were in a shop and said, "Do you know who I am councillor whoever," then that's none of those examples that I've given, but it's still a reference to being a councillor in the activity that you're undertaking. So I think that's why I've used the word somehow, but it's a matter for this committee. Whatever this committee decides is appropriate, then that's what will get carried forward. So I guess that's a question for this committee when we get to the point of considering the report.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just come in there, Arnold? Have you got a suggestion for a change on that one?
It's just, I think the word somehow, is open to interpretation. People can challenge it on the word somehow. Well, so just take that word out, and it then reads whatever it reads. I haven't got the computer. What page was it?
In your pack.
Yeah.
It is page 11, and it's the table, the first part of the table that we're referring to.
Yeah, so yeah, right. Unless you make reference to your position as a councillor. It's just the word somehow rattled me brain a bit. That was all. Because I like to be perfect.
You may succeed where others fail, Councillor England.
Diplomacy. All right, I'll be quiet.
I can see Councillor Scott has a question as well.
I have, very briefly. First of all, just to say that I agree with what Councillor England is saying there. The word somehow, if that's taken out of that, then I know I had problems with the wording previously, but if the word somehow is taken out of the two suggestions of page 3 and page 7, then I personally would have no problem with the rest of it. I think it does still leave us leeway to have a personal opinion. And I do agree that if we are walking around saying, "Do you know who I am?" or whatever, or referencing ourselves as a councillor, then that's a different argument. So I'm happy as long as the word somehow is taken out. Thank you.
So Councillor Scott has referenced section 7 there in his comment. So that was the second part, page 7, sorry. That was the second aspect where I was suggesting some addition. And that was after the first paragraph in section 5.1 to add the words, you should be aware, and this is really for clarity, but you should be aware that your behaviour in your personal capacity may result in action being taken under this code of conduct if you identify as being a councillor whilst behaving in a manner which is in breach of the code of conduct, or if you give members of the public the impression that you are a councillor despite acting in your personal capacity. One exception to this is where you are found guilty of certain criminal offences which would preclude you from being a councillor or would bring the role of councillor into disrepute regardless of whether you had identified yourself as councillor. I've included that because there are some criminal offences that are so serious that they would disqualify you from being a member. And it doesn't matter whether you're committing it and referencing the fact that you're a councillor or not. So that final bit is really just to clarify that in some circumstances, something that you do, even if you're not referencing that you're a councillor, may still engage the code of conduct. So that was the second part that I was suggesting was amended. Councillor Seymour.
Yes, well, I've expressed my opinion on this before. To my mind, you are always a councillor, and whether you're operating on a private social media level or not, you will be known in your area. It will be picked up by people who do know you as a councillor, and personally, I can't support either of these changes, as I've said before. So it depends. You're presumably going to take a vote at the end, but I can make it clear now that I can't support those two changes, and I would wish it to be noted by name that I do not.
So just for clarity, Councillor Seymour, and for the benefit of our clerk tonight, you're asking for your objection to be personally noted in the minutes.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes, and because I would prefer the code to stay as it is originally, rather than these two amendments.
Thank you. That was all I had to say on the private capacity aspect of the code of conduct. The final part that I was asked to look at was in relation to the wording of the code in respect of interests. So members will recall when we last discussed this, it was highlighted that there were in the new model code, there are 3 different types of interests. There are pecuniary interests, which I think most members are familiar with. There were other registrable interests, and then there were other non-registrable interests. And so there were 3 different types of interests. Our current code doesn't really make a distinction between registrable and non-registrable interests. We have pecuniary, which is those that have a financial impact, and then we have others. And we consider that they should all be declared on your register of interests. That's the safest way for members to protect themselves for a start from any suggestion of impropriety, but it also provides clarity so that you don't have 3 different regimes that you're looking at for dealing with any interests. And when you read the model code of conduct, the response to registrable and non-registrable is really the same, in that it should be declared, and depending on the circumstances, you may need to leave the meeting or you may not. Pecuniary interest, you definitely need to leave the meeting. So it doesn't appear that there's any, other than whether it goes on your register or it doesn't, there isn't really a difference to where those interests should be dealt with. And so the suggestion is that we just delete reference to other non-registrable interests, and we incorporate those examples that have been included as non-registrable into the registrable table. And therefore we then are replicating what we do now. We have our pecuniary interests and we have our others, which are all registrable, and that's the proposal that's before members to help with reducing confusion. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, I mean, at parish level, we've had discussions about whether someone has a pecuniary interest, and the interpretation has really been down to them to decide. And in some cases, they clearly have, but they're refusing to either declare it or leave the meeting. So the alterations you're suggesting, I think, covers that off quite well. You know, it's clear where an interest is, but it can't be up to the individual to say, oh, no, I haven't got one, when they clearly have. So any changes to this that strengthen it, I think, are very good.
I think if I can just come back on that, Councillor Scott, in relation to pecuniary interest, well, any interest actually, it is down to the member to decide whether they've got one or not, any of them, pecuniary or otherwise, and it's down to them to decide the appropriate course of action to take. The consequences of doing the wrong thing, if you like, so not declaring or not removing themselves from a meeting, depends on whether it's a pecuniary interest or an other interest. If it's a pecuniary interest, then potentially there's a criminal offence being committed, and that's something that the police would look at. They would probably take advice from the monitoring officer, because my experience is that police generally don't necessarily have a full understanding of the interest regime. So often there'll be consultation with the monitoring officer, but it's not a monitoring officer issue to look at failure to deal with pecuniary interest in the right way. Other interests, so the non-pecuniary, so the non-financial ones, that would be a monitoring officer matter to look at. What I would say, however, is in respect of all of them, and I know borough councillors are good at this, they take advice from the monitoring officer when they think there might be an interest, or do they need to take any action in a meeting? Do they need to declare it? You know, so I know that dialogue takes place at borough level. What I think is apparent from discussions that I've had is that different town and parish councils might have slightly different approaches, and different town and parish councillors may or may not seek advice from their clerk on those matters. But it is ultimately the member's responsibility to do the right thing. My role as monitoring officer is to offer training, and I do that. I have recently given training to a couple of parish councils, and I will continue to offer that moving forward. The good news is that I've recently appointed a new service delivery manager to fill the vacancy that's been there for the last 12 months. So the capacity within the team to offer that training will increase shortly. So there will be increased offers of training at parish and town councils. But yes, it is the member's individual responsibility to do it right. But we can offer guidance if we're asked.
Okay.
I will say there can be a lot of confusion, and I'm probably guilty over the years, and I've been involved for years, of a full understanding of what interests are and are not, and this does simplify things. Do you want me to take these things now? Because I've got 3 items really here. And the one is somehow. I think we've had 2 objections to that one. Yeah. I'm just going to take a vote on whether we're for or against using the word somehow.
Chair, at the risk of being a pedant, we need somebody to move and second the alteration. I guess that would be Councillor England and Councillor Scott, in light of the fact that the other 2 that raised it. But if they're happy to move the recommendation subject to that amendment in relation to that item, then you can take.
And I'll second.
Yeah, so we've got a move and a seconder. So I will put that to the vote now. So we've got Arnold and Peter. Yeah, so I will put that to the vote, and the vote will be to remove the word, let me get it right, somehow.
Okay, I'm in favour.
Do people feel? Yes, I think we should perhaps remove it. Makes it clearer.
Yeah.
So Chair, that's carried.
I abstain from that one because I don't want to say any of it there.
Sorry, Jackie, I didn't hear that quite.
I will abstain from that vote because I don't want either of those paragraphs in. Yeah.
Okay. So that one's passed. Yes. Yeah. And the next one are the 2 amendments which Jackie mentioned. I've forgotten the detail on them. No, sorry.
So.
Well, I wanted the code to remain as it was, and so that the application, the page 3, application of the code of conduct, the after the last paragraph add, and also on page 7, section 1.5, after the first paragraph add. I don't want to accept either of those changes. I want it to remain as the code has been produced by from where it's come from.
The LGA.
So I can't vote in support of those additions.
So Jackie's making a proposal there. Peter, you've got your hand up.
I'd like to just move that we accept the wording on page 3 and on page 7, excluding the word somehow.
Right.
So, Chair, just for clarity, we've already had a vote on the removal of the word somehow in that wording.
Yeah.
So now.
Okay, then I would move then that we accept the wording on page that is on page 3 and on page 7.
Right. What I'm looking for at the moment is a seconder for Jackie's proposal.
Well, I'm not really. I don't expect that to be voted for. So I just want it to be acknowledged in the minutes that I don't support it.
Can I just take it that will be carried,
Yeah.
and Jackie wants it logged that she has abstained from that? Yes.
Chair,
Everybody.
can I just come in? Is that all
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So unless this committee says otherwise, I think it's reasonable to suggest that motion's carried, in that the wording with the reference to somehow being removed is carried. And what we'll do, Councillor Seymour, we'll record your vote against that proposal in the minutes. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Peter, you wanted to make a comment?
Well, no. Are we speaking about that part of page 3 then, or is that carried? As it stands.
I'm sorry,
You're breaking up a little there, yeah.
Hang on, then let me just take off my video. You might hear me better now. Are we carrying that on page 3 then, and on page 7? Are we okay with that?
Yes.
We've taken out the word somehow.
Yes.
So that stands.
Yep.
And then the amendments on page 3 and page 7, as identified in the report, with somehow taken out, is carried.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Yep. And the next one, the types of interest to be changed from 3 types of interest to simplify it to make it 2 types of interest, as we've already had explained to us. Have we got any objections there or any comments? So I'll take that one as carried.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, Chair, just for completeness, the gifts and hospitality register, the change to the limit from £50 to 25.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
I think we agreed to that one last time, didn't we? So.
Yeah, I agree.
Are there any objections to that?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
That's everything for that item, Chair.
Yeah. So are we moving on to update on committee standards in public? No, we've done that.
Chair, I can see Councillor Reynolds has a hand up.
Oh yeah, sorry, Jilly, carry on.
Thank you. It's a quick question because obviously at the last meeting we talked about whether we can add in something into our code of conduct in relation to kind of the importance of safeguarding our roles as corporate parents. And obviously that hasn't been talked about yet. I'm just wondering whether that's where we're at to with that.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Reynolds, that had completely escaped me when I wrote the report. If it's okay with the committee, I can circulate some wording by email and get it agreed by email.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
And I think that is important, actually, Jilly, and
then I can just report it back to the next committee. But if we get it agreed, so we can move it forward, and then we can report it back to the next committee so it's noted.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Reynolds.
Could I come in there? I did raise, I can't remember where, some training in councillors. I'll give you a quick example. I went to pick up a fellow councillor and her teenage daughter invited me in to wait, and I refused and waited outside because my training in childcare is you don't put yourself in a position where you're alone with a child or whatever. Similarly, it could be with a vulnerable person. Is that incorporated into this in any way, or is it outside of this remit?
I think it's a slightly distinct point from the one that Councillor Reynolds was raising.
Yeah,
I think it probably falls within the training that we offer to members, Councillor England, around safeguarding, and also we offer training around councillor safety. So it's something that we could make sure is covered in either or both of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is important. It is relevant. Yeah, but
I'll just leave that thought there.
Then,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's certainly something people need to be alerted to, especially new councillors.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I believe that is part of the training.
It's part of the induction training. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're all on board with that one then. Yeah. So is there anything further, Anthea, that needs to be addressed tonight?
Yes, so the next report, Chair, is the recommendations for best practice, from the Committee for Standards on Public Life, which is the next item on the agenda. So are you happy for me to move straight into that, Chair?
Yes, if you could. I don't think anybody's got anything else to add to anything. No. Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, the Committee for Standards on Public Life produced a report in January 2019 in relation to ethical standards in local government. This committee has looked at that report in some detail in the past, and as well as the model code of conduct that we've just discussed, they also made 15 recommendations for best practice, which don't require a change in legislation. So what they did in their report is they made a number of recommendations, many of which require legislative changes, so are down to the government, and we're still waiting for a government response to that report in that respect. Other aspects were things that councils could do without needing a legislative change. That included the model code of conduct, but then also these 15 areas of best practice. Chair, it just seemed, because it's been a little while since this committee last had an update, it just seemed a timely opportunity to provide that update to members as to where we are on those recommendations. It's fair to say, so the committee last looked at it in February 2020, which was just before the COVID pandemic really started to take effect. So it's fair to say that some of the actions were implemented, or some of the recommendations were implemented. Some got to a certain point and then were put on hold because our resources were diverted to responding to the pandemic. But in the report that's before members this evening, so item 5 on the agenda, I have created a table at paragraph 4.2, so it starts on page 32 of your pack, and I've listed each of the 15 recommendations. And then the second column, or the second substantive column, sets out what the position was when this committee considered it in February 2020, and then the third column sets out, provides an update or sets out the current position. So, Chair, I don't intend to go through items 1 through to
15.
4, 1 to 4 in any detail.
Oh, right.
They are all being dealt with either through the adoption of the new code of conduct, or items or activity that we already undertake. But if I pick up item 5, which was local authorities publishing their gifts and hospitality register at least once a quarter, it was agreed at the committee in February that although the principle of publication was accepted, that it would be upon each update rather than quarterly. That hasn't been done yet because there hasn't been any updates to the register since then. My view is that we probably need to at least get a first publication done, and so allowing for the elections to take place and then the flurry of activity that takes place after new members are elected. My proposal is that we do an initial publication by no later than the end of July, to at least get that rolling, and then we can continue to update it as needed. Item 6 was an agreement from this committee that we adopt a public interest test against which any allegations against members are filtered, and it was agreed that that's something we'd look into. I have had discussions with the independent person in relation to this. In practice, we do a public interest test in any event, but there's nothing in writing to set out what that is, what it looks like, how it's done. So I'll work with the independent person moving forward to come up with a form of words to explain what we mean when we refer to the public interest test when considering allegations. It essentially means that we're not looking, we wouldn't consider anything that looks as though it's vexatious or malicious or spurious or minor in detail, but that would be in conjunction with the independent person who would help make that assessment. Item 7 was a recommendation that authorities should have access to at least 2 independent persons, and that principle was agreed in February last year. A recruitment pack was prepared, so including a role description, information that's needed relevant to the role, and then that was passed to the independent person to have a look at, who provided comment, and we got to a final position ready to release it, and then the pandemic took hold, and so we didn't publish the recruitment pack on the basis that we didn't feel it would probably be the best time either for us to undertake recruitment activity, but also for receiving applications. We can pick that up now, I think, because I think we're in a much more stable position now than we were a year ago. And the proposal is that we do joint recruitment with Shropshire and Wrekin Fire Authority, because our current independent person is also their independent person. And as the monitoring officer at the Fire Authority, it assists me if I have consistency across the two. And I will report back to this committee when that recruitment's taken place. I don't intend to deal with item 9 because that was dealt with at the last meeting. Item 10 is something that we already do. So again, I don't intend to deal with that. Item 11 was that formal standards complaints about the conduct made by a parish clerk, parish or town clerk, about the conduct of a parish or town councillor directed towards them should be made by the chair of the council or by the council as a whole, rather than the clerk in all but exceptional circumstances. It was anticipated that the model code of conduct would deal with that, but it hasn't. So I'm already intending to update the complaints process and information available. So I'll make specific reference to that being an expectation that where a complaint is made by a parish clerk, that it's picked up either by the chair or the council, and I'll include reference to that. In reality, if I get any calls from clerks asking for advice, it's advice that I give now in any event, but it would be useful to formalise that in a complaints process. Item 12 is something we already undertake, and I've already referenced the fact that we'll be enhancing the training offer moving forward. Item 13 was agreed at the last committee. Item 14 is something that we need to pick up, and I need to liaise with officers, internal officers, and that was a recommendation that bodies, wholly owned bodies of councils should publish essentially an annual and this committee considered that to be good practice, and so that's something that I do need to pick up and progress with officers internally. And then the final item.
Can I just come in there? Have we got any kind of timescale on that?
I'll pick it up as soon as possible, Councillor Seymour. The last, I think, it was something that my predecessor was dealing with, and then my appointment was in the middle of the pandemic, so it's something that I'm conscious needs to be done, but I haven't done because there have been other priorities in terms of the pandemic. But I think, like I say, we're now in a more sustained period. It won't be before the elections because that's my next priority, but shortly after that I'll pick it up with officers and see if we can reach a position where we can meet that recommendation, and I'll report back to this committee on it.
It would be before we take this whole thing to full council.
I would certainly hope so. It's not solely reliant on me, but yes, I would hope so, unless we encounter any difficulties, which I don't envisage. But yes, I'll have those discussions and hopefully report back before we go to full council. And then the final recommendation was that senior officers should meet regularly with political group leaders or group whips to discuss standards issues. And the committee back in February last year agreed the principle of that. But my recollection is there was quite a lot of discussion around whether we'd be breaching any confidentiality or data, personal data, if we shared details of the names of people. And so it was agreed that general discussions could take place around any complaints that are received by the monitoring officer, any standards issues. So themes around the sorts of complaints that are received, any activity around that sort of thing. And that's something that periodically I do have a conversation with group leaders around. So that's been dealt with as well. I don't think there's any recommendations to move, Councillor Jones. It was simply for noting, really, for the benefit of the committee, because I'm mindful it's been a little while since the committee's looked at it.
Yeah, obviously. On that last point, I think it's worth pressing about social media and where we stand with that. Just to maybe add something in there.
Sorry, the last point in relation to group leaders or
to complaints. When you receive a complaint, because I see social media obviously has changed a lot of things over the last few years, and I think that's quite important that that's stressed.
Yes, and I think it's definitely recognised. It's a tool that many members use now to make contact with their communities. It's a tool that many individuals use to make contact with their councillors. So it's definitely far more prominent in the last few years than it has been historically. I think certainly the model code of conduct will help because it does make reference to social media activity. The indication from the LGA was that they would also release some documents to help with guidance for members in undertaking social media activity as well. So as soon as we get that, then that can be circulated as well to members. And it certainly forms part of my code of conduct training quite significantly now around what might be appropriate, what might not be. Obviously, that'll be updated to reflect the new code of conduct once it's adopted.
I think on that point, are there any comments on that one, or is everybody quite happy with it?
Happy.
Yep. Okay, that's brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, Anthea. You've worked very hard on this.
May I just ask why we didn't get these papers through? It wasn't until I picked things up last night to read, ready for today, that I realised I didn't have access to all the papers.
Yes, that's down to my resources, Councillor Seymour. It's as simple as that. I've already referenced that I haven't had a service delivery manager for the last 12 months. And I'm also in the middle of elections planning. The timing has been difficult for me. It's down to my capacity and nothing else. So I take full responsibility for that.
Right, because it was quite a bit of reading, yes.
It's the reason I said thank you, Anthea, because I know you have put an awful lot of work into some of this.
It's certainly not what I like to do, Councillor Seymour, and it's an exception rather than the norm.
Yes, if we could, because we can't make a judgment unless we actually see it in print. So I don't feel we should be making a judgment unless we do. Yeah.
But on the whole, Jackie, are you happy with what you've seen?
Oh yes, because I got them this morning and so I've read them today. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is there any further comments?
No.
No. Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chair.
I don't think we've got a date for a next meeting yet, have we?
No, Chair, because we're waiting for the schedule of meetings to be approved at the annual council tomorrow, and once that's been done, we'll get the dates in the diaries, but they're all on there. So hopefully members have had a chance to have a look and at least save the dates in diaries if needed.
Well, thank you all for your input. I mean, the last couple of years of doing this and looking at this has been very informative to me. I'm sure to everybody else.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.